On the morning of September 2nd, 2019, South Fayette Township Police forced their way into the home of 67-year-old Margaret Soom. Her family had been trying to reach her since the day before after her brother's death, but when she didn't answer, they asked police to do a welfare check. Inside, the scene was horrific. Blood stained the walls and floors, and in the bathroom, Margaret was found dead in the bathtub. She had been brutally beaten. Her ribs and spine were broken, and the medical examiner ruled her cause of death as blunt force trauma to the head, neck and torso. Investigators immediately suspected her son, David Soom, who had been living in the house at the time. Their suspicions were confirmed when they searched his phone and found 277 photos documenting the assault. The first photo, time-stamped August 30th at 4:50 a.m, showed Margaret already hurt, and the images grew more disturbing over the next few days, from her bleeding and struggling to her lying lifeless in bed, and finally her body in the bathtub. In one particularly chilling shot, David even posed next to her with a thumbs up. His phone searches painted an equally dark picture with queries like how to clean up a crime scene, how long before a body decomposes, and how long do you wait to dispose of a body? When police arrested him just days later, at his uncle's funeral, he had Margaret's jewellery, credit cards and blank cheques on him. A search of his hotel room revealed even more of her belongings, including her revolver. The murder shocked the community, but for those who knew David, it was a grim escalation of behaviour that had been spiralling for years. His history of violence went back nearly a decade. In 2011, at just 22, he was arrested for DUI. By 2014, he had already been charged with harassment and then arrested for assaulting his mother. Margaret suffered rib injuries but still defended him in court, pushing for leniency. The following year, after an argument with his father about a vacation, David attacked him so severely that neighbours called police. His father's injuries to the brain and spinal cord required long-term care, and he died just over 3 years later. Though David was charged with aggravated assault and other crimes, he managed to avoid significant prison time. In 2016, Margaret herself called 911 from a neighbour's house after David attacked her again. She told police he had picked her up and squeezed her ribs, bragging, "This is how the Navy SEALs do it." Even though he was still on probation from the earlier assault, she once again asked for leniency, and the charge was dropped to harassment. He eventually served 8 to 16 months for the attack on his father, but was released early after completing a treatment program. Not long after, in July 2017, he was arrested again for DUI and careless driving following a crash. David often told people he was a Navy SEAL, even asking police to give him a break because of it, a total lie he had been repeating for years. In August 2018, he met a woman online and started a romantic relationship, convincing her too that he had served in the Navy's elite ranks. The following summer, in July 2019, the two travelled together to Atlantic City, New Jersey. The trip quickly turned dark. Early on, David hit her, scaring her badly, but she chose to stay. Over the next 3 days, the violence escalated in their hotel room. He choked her until she passed out, punched her repeatedly, and even waterboarded her in the bathroom. Her nightmare finally ended when a bellhop knocked on their door, giving her the chance to escape. Police got a warrant for David's arrest, but because it was never properly logged into the National Crime Information Center, out-of-state police had no way of knowing he was wanted. David slipped back to Pennsylvania without issue. On August 24th, 2019, he attacked a Lyft driver who had gotten lost. Again, no arrest was made since the New Jersey warrant was invisible to police databases. Just days later, his mother Margaret would become his final victim. David's disturbing behaviour didn't suddenly appear in adulthood. The warning signs were there from the beginning. Born on April 26, 1989 in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, he grew up surrounded by wealth and privilege. His father, also named David, was a successful dentist, and his mother Margaret owned a dance studio. Margaret already had 2 daughters from a previous marriage, but David was her only son with the dentist. His parents spoiled him relentlessly, showering him with expensive gifts, and even paying him small amounts of money just for basic things like sitting at the dinner table or getting into the car. His father especially liked to show off the family's wealth, buying flashy things and making sure everyone noticed. But underneath the luxury, darker behaviours were emerging. When David was only 5, he and a friend killed a bird. Confronted about it, David showed no reaction, no sadness, no guilt, nothing. Margaret was shaken by his lack of emotion and warned, "This is what serial murderers do." The family itself soon began to fracture. In 2001, David's parents separated. His father maintained his wealthy lifestyle, but Margaret lost nearly everything. She had to close her dance studio and take on a regular job just to make ends meet. As a young adult, David went off to Washington, D.C. for college, studying mathematics. His father covered everything: tuition, housing, even his apartment, but David couldn't hold it together. In 2010, Margaret came to visit him, and something happened that landed them both in the hospital. Margaret said David had cut himself, and she fell and hit her head, though the story seemed suspicious, as if she were protecting him. Not long after, David stopped attending classes altogether and was expelled. Back in Pittsburgh, he reinvented himself with a lie that would follow him for years. He claimed he had become a Navy SEAL. Margaret repeated the story as if it were true, and David embraced it fully. He started lifting weights, bulking up, and obsessing over his appearance. That false identity became the core of who he pretended to be. After Margaret's death and David's arrest, the case wound its way through the courts. In August 2022, prosecutors offered him a plea deal. He admitted guilt by pleading to third-degree homicide and was sentenced to 20 to 40 years in prison, with credit for time already served. If he makes it to his earliest possible release date, it won't be until 2039. At his sentencing, David stood up and spoke to his family, his words heavy with regret. He said he couldn't believe he had let himself fall so far that he could do something so horrible. He admitted he thought about it every day, that he had killed his own mother, and told them he was sorry, though he knew an apology could never be enough. He addressed his sisters and aunts directly, saying he understood it was impossible for them to forgive him, and that he didn't forgive himself either. All he wanted them to know, he said, was that he was truly sorry. Now David is serving out his sentence. By all accounts, he's a model prisoner, spending his time going to Bible studies and staying out of trouble. But for those who knew his parents, and for the family he shattered, his story isn't one of redemption. Instead, it's remembered as a tragic warning ignored for too long. The downfall of a privileged life twisted into years of violence, and ultimately, a family destroyed.